hit the share screen again.
Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Contemporary Issues class on a sunny February day. We are going to be blessed with Ron Puning talking today about authoritarianism in the third and last segment of this series. So welcome to us. Our regular announcements are, number one, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. Click on the microphone icon so we can keep the background noise down low, please. And we are video recording this for future playback. And also please be kind to our speaker and each other as usual. We are here to discuss the issues, but not argue about it. So we appreciate your cooperation. And how's everybody doing? Any other announcements or things in the news to talk about today? Been a fairly quiet week with the COVID cases going down, they say. I got my first shot, so that was good. They said, called me and said they had some leftover and they were now taking 64-year-olds where I am at. So I was able to get one and had no reaction. So I was a happy camper.
Great.
I know a lot of us are getting vaccinated and hopefully we'll be back to semi-normal very soon. Sorry, Gene, I could not hear you too well.
Colorado's doing a great job.
Yes, very good. Thank you. Okay, we're about ready to start. Anything else before we turn it over to Ron? All righty, Ron. Thank you again for talking about authoritarianism in all its forms in the world today. It's a good thing for not us to remember, just not for leaders, but also for family and business and lots of things. So thank you for talking to us today.
Okay. All righty. We'll get, there's a couple areas of the presentation this morning to get a little bit sensitive. It's important to remember that we all have some degree of authoritarianism, and some aspects of it are good, others are bad. When we think of the bad part of authoritarianism, we think of when it goes to an extreme, when it becomes, when you take the authoritarian test on Altemeyer's scale, and if you rank really high, that's bad. Although, again, all of us have some authoritarianism within us. Okay, so why do we need to rescue high right-wing authoritarians anyway? And again, the term right doesn't mean politically. There's a lot of high RWA followers, again, the high ones that are often earnest, hardworking, happy, charitable, supportive of their in-group, and good friends. So why do we need to rescue them, and what's so bad? Well, in previous lessons, we learned that some of the characteristics of the authoritarian followers are a high degree of submission, high level of aggression in the name of their authorities, and a high level of insisting that others follow the norm. All of us have some degree of this. You know, we do submit to authority. We take action when things go against what needs to go to have a stable government. And we all want to some degree insist that others follow the norms, particularly in areas like obeying the law, not harming others, and things like that. But it's when these things get extreme that bad things happen. So again, the danger is high ethnocentrism. That's getting really, really looking at your own group, your us and not them. If we start seeing us, them, and taking it to extremes, we can start persecuting those people and looking down on people that aren't a member of our tribe. And our tribe, of course, our nation, our political group, our religion, our sports team, extremists then can lead to really bad things. And we can start mistreating, shunning, and even doing harm to people who aren't in our group. There was a pastor in North Carolina, this was a good decade ago, that he did a series of sermons on the evil of LBGT. And within a couple weeks in an area around this church, there were at least a half a dozen incidences of persecution, people spray painting the homes of gays, threatening them and whatever. So there's a case where authoritarianism can really go amok. And then finally, of course, taken to a real extreme, high right-wing authoritarianism can lead on a political and national level to figures emerging that are fascist or extreme religious people or social movements that can cause a lot of harm. So that's the danger part of it if it goes to the extreme. The American Psychology Association, consensus on critical thinking. Generally, high authoritarianism tears down critical thinking. Critical thinking is important to have good relationships, families, churches, communities, and in essence, nations depend on good critical thinking and not high authoritarianism. So that's why we need to worry about it when it gets too high. There was a letter sent to Adam Kinzinger, we've heard about it in the last couple of weeks. He's a Republican congressman of Illinois, and here's an excerpt, some of the things out of that letter. It was signed by several members of his family, and the letter said, "You're part of the devil's army," telling Adam, as well as the Democrats and the fake news media. So here's a case where you're taking them, the Democrats or the news media, and making them the devil, enemy, evil. And the letter goes on and says, President Trump's not perfect. It's not for us to judge, but he is a Christian. Of course, the measure of whether he's a Christian, goes on in the letter, said, here's some leaders that have told us he's a Christian. So he must be a Christian because our leaders have told him. So here's an example of persecution coming down on even a Republican leader when they start to speak out against authoritarian people. Authoritarians have a propensity to fear. My favorite comic book as a kid was Green Lantern. And one of the issues, there was a bad evolved villain called the Shark, and he was going to hunt down people. And you can see a picture here. It's an excerpt from that comic book. And Green Lantern's thinking to himself, his friends, his girlfriend, his best buddy, they're in a terrible state of fear. And authoritarian followers, they have found, are noticeably more afraid of the world than other people are. And that's probably why they crave protection of a strong hero in a militant group. Okay, genetics plays a big role in how you become more prone to be a strong authoritarianism person. I highly recommend the great course, Why You Are Who You Are. The book only has a couple pages on authoritarianism, but it looks at our whole personality. And people pretty much agree that the 5 key things that constitute our personality is our degree of extroversion and introversion, our degree of neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness, and honesty, humility. The areas where the person is likely to be in authoritarianism is in the area of neuroticism, which measures your negative emotions, your degree of insecurity, your degree of anger, propensity to anger, and being aggression prone, and your degree of openness. And the scientists have shown that dogs and chimps all share these 5 big traits as well as people. So genetics does play a role in your becoming an authoritarian. How much? Research has shown that on the average, most of the human personality characteristics fall in the correlation range of 0.3 to 0.6. I won't do a mathematical expository on correlation math today, other than say, if there's 100% correlation with genetics, it's a 1. A good example is eye color. Your environment doesn't determine your eye color. That's 100% genetic. So we would say your heritability for eye color is 1. But the heritability for other characteristics, the big 5 personality characteristics, falls between 0.3 and 0.6. Here's some other heritability numbers from genetics. Your attitude toward reading is a 0.37. Attitude toward organized religion, 0.45. Heritability of identifying politically liberal or conservative, 0.43. Attitude towards exercising, 0.36. Your authoritarian score tends to correlate with your parents' score by a 0.4 to 0.5. So, and in general, they found that your RWA correlates by 0.7 with your life experiences. So the correlation of authoritarianism with experience is higher than your correlation with genetics. Bob Alexander, I see your hand there.
Yeah, I didn't want to. You're on a roll, but thanks. I wanted to do it as quiet as I could. Does those indicate low scores? Like in other words, does that mean attitude toward reading, as an example, 0.37? Does that mean they're uninformed, that they don't read very much?
No, that means their desire to, their love of reading correlates with genetics somewhat. In other words, yes, you are likely, if both your parents love to read, there's a higher probability that you will like to read than somebody at random.
Oh, okay.
And vice versa. If your parents hated reading and didn't like it, the chances are greater that you'll follow that correlation and not like to read.
Okay.
Same thing with exercising. If your parents were both Olympic swimmers, the odds are much better that you'll really like exercising and going to the gym.
Okay.
The problem with that is determining exactly how much of it is the environment and how much is genetics. Because if you have parents who like to read, they're more likely to read and model it for you as well. And is that genetic or is that environmental? And there's debates that go on ongoing in psychology on how much of it is environmental and how much is genetic. And,
Generally feel
everybody agrees that there's a portion of it that's genetic and a portion of it that's not.
okay. And they've found this with animals. There's the more bold animals that come out of the clearing or come out of the brush and go out into the clearing to get food, and the ones that go out far out into the clearing to get the better grass have a better chance of survival because they get a better diet, they get more food, they're not as likely to starve. But they're also the ones that are likely to get nabbed by a predator because they are bold enough to go out there into the middle of the meadow. All right. Here's a really cool experiment done at a college. Guys by the name of Nisbet and Cohane took blood samples from a whole bunch of students in a class. The people in class volunteered. Then they told them to take their test tube blood samples down the hall and turn them in a lab room down the hall. And as they traveled one at a time down to deliver their lab sample, they had a big guy that would kind of clumsily bump into them and call them a bad name. and then they would he would move on quickly before a fight started. They would go down the hall, turn in their blood sample, and then they would measure the cortisol and the testosterone after the encounter. And they found that the Southern subjects, the students that had more of a Southern heritage, showed a much higher aggression and reaction rate than the Northern students did. And we're not trying to be prejudiced against North versus South, but they just found out that in general, the people with more of a Deep South or Appalachian heritage reacted more, even by sampling their blood. You can see it from the data here, the before and after point. The Southern subjects jumped up a lot more. And you say, well, why is that? And there's a genetic explanation. They have found that a lot of the more Deep South families and Appalachian families come from Scottish, Irish, Northern England families where they had to be herders, and the herders had to contend for their territory and compete. And they would more easily get excited by conflict and interaction. So we have a genetic propensity from our national and social heritages that make us prone to some. They've also done studies in China, and they've found that the people in northern China who tend more rice fields tend to be more congenial and get along together better, just genetically. They're not as prone to getting in fights, getting in conflicts. Unlike the shepherds, who are trying to keep the other shepherds away from their grazing areas, these Chinese are all trying to work together in one rice field. And so they have a genetic propensity that's built up genetically over time to be more peaceful and cooperative. We're going to stop for a minute here, take just a couple questions. Have you seen genetic propensities in your family tree relative to personality? You can take a couple. Okay, I can't hear anybody coming in, so maybe we'll move on.
Ron, I'll just say
yeah.
that in my family, I think there's a propensity to fight versus flee.
In your family?
Yeah.
Okay. And I've heard in social conversations, people of certain ethnicities being a little more prone to fighting. Yeah, I've definitely heard that just in my the course of my life. Okay, we'll move on. Jerry Butler sat in last week, and I don't know if he's on today or not, but he mentioned that his wife was reading the book The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and in that book is this classic chart, and it shows how people that have a more liberal or a more conservative approach politically tend to rate these different attributes higher or lower. And the more liberal people tend to rate care and fairness higher, and the more conservative people certainly don't ignore care and fairness, but they relatively, on a relative scale, rate loyalty, authority, and sanctity or purity a bit higher. So that's a good book worth reading. So we know that conservatives on the average are more concerned with the binding foundations, if we can call them, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And those are good things, but they can be stepping stones to becoming a right-wing authoritarian or having a social dominance orientation if they're taken to an extreme and not balanced out. And you generally find that the conservatives have more of a need for predictability and structure in your life. Hence they tend to emphasize loyalty, obedience, and law and order. We also know, let's jump to the next slide. Some of the characteristics of right-wing authoritarians are they're more anxious with ambiguity. In other words, when there's a lot of things in life that are not black and white, they're gray, they're uncertain, they're unknown, and they just have more trouble handling ambiguity. The more authoritarian person has a stronger need for closure. They don't like uncertainty. They don't like the doctor telling them, we'll have to do more tests. We're going to have to wait. We don't know how this is going to turn out. The authoritarian person wants to get to an answer. They don't like being hung in limbo. They tend to dislike novelty. They won't be as prominent in novelty shops. And they're more comforted by structure and hierarchy. That means they're more comfortable in a military environment. They fit better in boot camp. They also readily perceive circumstances as threatening. They get threatened more easily, go into that fear state. And they're more parochial in their empathy. I'm working on a lesson right now that I think is going to be a real good one on the subject of empathy. But empathy is always stronger within your own group. You feel more empathy toward your own group, be it your tribe, your religion, your whatever. And it's harder to have empathy for people that are them and not us. Okay, now we're going to throw a little, some people may not like this, but it's a fact. In the brain, there's the amygdala, they call them the little walnuts or the nuts down in the deep part of the brain. And
Ron,
yeah, go ahead.
I like that quotation on the previous slide.
Oh, let's go back to it.
I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned.
Okay. Yeah, that's Richard Feynman, and that's the ability of the non-authoritarian to accept uncertainty. So, okay, good point. All right, jumping to the brain, the amygdala, the primitive part of the brain, they've done measurements, and they found that liberals tend to have larger, what they call ACCs. The ACC is the anterior cingulate cortex. Let's not call it Arapahoe or Aurora Community College, but it's the banana, the purple area I have shaded on this one diagram. So if you're low in authoritarianism and more liberal, you probably have a bigger banana. And if you're a high authoritarian, you probably have a larger amygdala. And the correlation numbers are there, minus 0.27 and 0.23. So it's not a huge correlation, but it is significant. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. Okay, the book Behave, which I found actually in our church bookshelf library. And it's just a couple years old, but I can't recommend it enough. And this is right out of the book Behave. And it says there's a link between lower intelligence, high right-wing authoritarianism, and prejudice, even after controlling for education and socioeconomic status. And the standard explanation, most people think it's because the RWA likes simple answers. The high authoritarian person wants simple answers. And so people with poor abstract reasoning skills don't want complexity. And so they're more attracted to an authoritarian approach. Also, people with poor reasoning skills hate ambiguity. So they also like the simple answers. And then the people that don't like handling integrative complexity and want to keep their thoughts in compartmentalized boxes, like this picture, also, they don't like integrative complexity. So you find that the authoritarian wants simple answers, doesn't want uncertainty, and doesn't want integrative complexity. Not controversial, but there's data to back it up. It's truth. Also, looking at nursery school, boys and girls in nursery school. The little girls who are more likely genetically to become more liberal are more talkative and dominating. They express negative feelings more openly. They're more verbally fluent. They tend to be more independent and self-assertive. On the negative side, they often shift blame to others and might tease others more. They tend to be more aggressive and set high standards, and they're more open to new toys, playing with new toys. The little girls who are likely to become more conservative are more inhibitive and restrictive, more indecisive, more shy and reserved, more anxious in an unpredictable environment, more obedient and compliant, and tended to give in and yield to others more. Now, when they did the study on boys, they found that there were far, far fewer differences. Looking at boys in nursery school, it's much harder to predict how they're going to turn out. But they did find that there's some correlation. The boys that in nursery school that are likely to turn out more liberal are the ones that tend to be more resourceful and independent, where the ones that are more likely to be more conservative and authoritarian are already showing a little more innate fear level, readiness to feel guilty, more anxious in an unpredictable environment. I remember my first day of kindergarten. It's one of the few memories I've got of kindergarten, but I remember several kids that were tree hugging their mom's leg there that first day of kindergarten. Okay.
Ron, I've got a question.
Go ahead, Harvey.
I'm sure you're going to cover this later, but so far, my feeling is kind of discouraged about, is there ever opportunity for some kind of conversation / bridge building when there is this sort of genetic and brain predisposition one way or the other?
That's why I'm trying to move quickly. We're gonna get to that. The last couple slides, and I hope where we have most of our discussion is what can we do to maybe influence and change it. So let's try to get to that point as quick as we can here. The answer is it's difficult. It's not easy. There's no easy answers, but there are some things we can do, and we'll talk about them. In his book, Altemeyer's book on authoritarianism, and we've looked at 2 of his books in the previous lessons, he talks about, as a professor, he said, here's when the kids show up in my psychology class, he calls the kids Hugh and Lou. And he said, Hugh, which we're going to describe here real quickly, is likely to have a real high right-wing authoritarian score, and Lou's likely to have a low one. And very quickly, he said, Hugh, the kid that shows up that scores high on the RWA test, probably grew up in a straight traditional family that featured parental dominance. And they were taught obedience to authority was taught as a very high virtue. Mindful and respect for authorities was stressed in the family. You'll hear the words yes ma'am, no ma'am appear in those families. Kids are usually punished if they step over the line, spanked occasionally when they're young. They're often Protestant fundamentalist and taught that the Bible is absolutely true and inerrant. The Hugh is likely to feel blessed and enriched with his community of fellow believers, which he feels good about his church group. feels deeply moved when praying that God's listening to him. And it said also at age 17, the clothes, friends, books, magazines he reads, TV shows, and these things, even at age 17, are often heavily monitored by Hugh's parents. So he said, this is the kind of kid that's more likely to have a high RWA score. Now, granted, a lot of these things are good. You certainly do want some. Respect for authority. Nothing wrong with having a strong faith. So there's good in all these things. He's just saying if it's extreme, you might end up with an RWA. He also points out a gal named Lou, and her father's never been an authority figure. And the goal of her parents was not to supply copies of themselves to the next generation. In other words, they didn't want to exactly imprint and make their kids a carbon duplicate of themselves. The parents didn't mind mild rebelliousness. The parents didn't teach Lou's parents didn't teach her the authorities were always right. They were taught to value equality and cooperation more than dominance and competition. So that's a good thing, I think. They were not raised in well-defined control groups, nor they weren't taught that different people were dangerous and evil. Lou probably lost her virginity at age 16 and had intercourse with her boyfriend on a regular basis. And they did not learn from their parents the truth was in the bag. They were told that they had to go learn truth for themselves, not to just become a carbon copy of everything their parents told us. Of course, for most of us, we're in the middle. Most of us weren't raised in either an extremely authoritarian-oriented kind of family or a wild liberal one. Most of us came from mixed families. Often we'd have even different parents that went different directions. All right. Okay. Loosening up. Altemeyer in his book says that when kids get to college, most students at a big state university will show about a 10% drop in their right-wing authoritarian score as they go to college. And the liberal arts majors will drop a little bit more. And the people that came in as high RWAs will show the biggest drop, maybe 15 or 20% in their score, which is significant. And he says, well, what is it about college that makes people less authoritarian? He said, well, he said the students tend to meet more kinds of people and have experiences that their classmates had years earlier. They go to college and they really open up and get taken out of often a sheltered environment. He said he didn't see professors as being the main source of turning your kids into wild, irresponsible liberals. He said it was the other youth, the dorm activities, the frats, the sororities that unleashed the change, rarely the professors. So what opens up kids in college is just they're mixing with other people that have come from broader backgrounds. And of course, we've probably all seen examples in our lives when we went to college where some kids that came from really controlled backgrounds going wild when they got to college, really breaking loose. Okay, so experience is really important to loosen you up as you get a little older. And I'm going to pose the question, what experiences have loosened you up in life? Were your parents really strict, very modern, or middle of the road, or one of each? I love that cartoon here. When you knew your cousin come back from taking a walk before Thanksgiving dinner, you can see Daffy Duck's red-eyed and Bugs Bunny looks like he's smoked something. So what are some of the things in your life that maybe were experiences that loosened you up?
This is Terry Twilliger. In my experience, I was drafted into the Navy at 23, and my home port was New York City.
Okay.
Working at the playhouse with all those gay folks.
Anybody else? My wife Alice just said that her working at the Country Dinner Playhouse and being exposed to the many backgrounds of so many actors and actresses opened up her view of life and how people, particularly LGBT, she met a lot of people that were LGBT.
Ron, I like to talk about that last slide. I was raised by a very strict authoritarian parents. Spanked. I mean, I could go into case study. I swear to God. Okay, very, very not a good childhood. But when I went to college, I didn't go wild. I met my wife, very controlled, raised on a farm, and so best thing that happened in my life. But I think being a musician, being around a lot of varied people, LGBTQ, you know, not just gay and lesbian, but I mean just a lot of different types of people. It just changed how I thought. You know what I mean? That experience around, you know, singers, dancers, you know, it just, you know, completely changed how I thought about life.
This is Terry. I think parents ought to read these books called Hide and Seek. You want your kid to be a hide or a seeker?
Okay. In this slide, Bob Altemeyer, again, wrote the couple books on authoritarianism, said that the high RWA people often missed many of the experiences that might have lowered their authoritarianism. They often hadn't known any people that were unpatriotic, didn't attend church, or challenged their tribal norms. I've known some kids that were homeschooled by very religious parents and kept in a very, very tight environmental box. So Bob said that getting a more mixed environment certainly it can lead you astray and get you into trouble, but it can also be very good to open you up and keep you from being extremely authoritarian.
My most impressionable years were during the Depression, and you didn't waste anything. You know, it was all activities were family centered, and I think that, you know, had an impact.
Ron, I think it's important, one other aspect, and that's I don't just talk about my wife because, you know, obviously everyone called their spouse, but she was on the other end of the spectrum. So what I felt was she had what I always wanted to have. So she was raised on a dairy farm, very strong, the other side. Okay, so I met her freshman year. So, and then being a musician and having her in my life, I mean, she taught me how to drive a stick shift. So, but you know, having that strong libertarianism, it tended to ground me. You know, it grounded me, and then the varied other people I saw. So I found that switch happening like freshman year, which I thought was, you know. So I have to say that other aspect, you know, when you're around people raising a farm, you know, and the first vegetables I ate were after I met my wife. You know what I mean? You know, I never had broccoli in my life until I was in college, and my wife. You know what I mean? So you know, does that make sense from what you're reading? All of a sudden, I have this great person here that's like grounding me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she obviously opened you up, and you probably had a thirst to see a bigger, brighter world and not be confined so much. Okay, here's a few pictures I like of some more strict authoritarian backgrounds. Okay, Altemeyer also found that as we age, we tend to get a little less authoritarian, maybe because we get more life experiences. And his numbers showed that he sent the test to a lot of his students years later and found that there was a 5, 9, and 11% drop with time in the RWA score. So age tends to make us a little less authoritarianism. But he also found that the people that had kids didn't get as big a drop in their authoritarian score. Maybe they found out that a good, a bit of authoritarianism is needed to raise and nurture kids. Okay, now we're going to get to the fun part. Is can we rescue people from authoritarianism? Can we loosen them up a bit so they're not caught so deep in this water of super strong authoritarianism? And we, of course, mentioned a couple of these resources. We looked at Rick Steves' Fascism CD, and I've also read the book by an ex-Jehovah's Witness this week. He gives his experience in breaking loose from an extremely authoritarian group. But here's what Altemeyer says, and we want to get the conversation. He said, here's some things that you'd like to do, but are hard to do. He said, you want to try to reduce fear, try to get the fear down in people. But he said, that's not easy. You want to try to reduce self-righteousness, being that self-righteousness is a major releaser of aggression. So you want to try to make people see that, yeah, you're not better than other people, and don't start preaching and standing up on a pedestal, putting yourself on a pedestal and seeing yourself as better than others. He said also he felt it was important for churches to nip the religious roots of ethnocentrism. He said, encourage the parents' religious instruction to be more about being God's kids before being a denomination or particular facet. Don't teach the kids that they're to be cling to the fact that they're Catholic or Jewish or Presbyterian. Teach them that you have a responsibility to be a child of God to all mankind, not just your own religion. He said, teach children not to trust authorities automatically. That doesn't mean you raise your kids to be rebels and don't trust anybody, but extreme obedience can be a real danger. And we'll get into that on a lesson in empathy in a few weeks. Encourage authoritarians to read books that challenge authoritarianism. And Altemeyer said, good luck. And help authoritarians realize that sometimes they're getting played for suckers. Then he came to the more practical things. He said, one thing about authoritarianism, and particularly the high authoritarianism, he said, they don't like to find out that they're out of the mainstream. They want to think that they're the norm. And if they start realizing that they're odd ducks and that they stick out and that their extremely prejudiced or authoritarian views are not in line with the norm, it can help them start to say, maybe I don't want to stay in this camp. He said also try to find common ground that you can work with them on. Maybe do community projects, coach a basketball team with somebody that's an authoritarian, and they can see that you're a good person like they are. You want to help the kids learn the sport. You're not a wild pot smoking idiot. And their desire to be normal is something you can work with them on. And so try to work with them sometime on a good deed, doing a charity, helping others, and whatever. At a church level, he said, the non-fundamentalist congregations can try to extend their hands to the fundamentalist brethren. He said that 62% of the low RWAs, in other words, people that score very low on an authoritarian test, do go to a faith group, although they're more likely to be liberal Catholics or liberal Protestants denominations. And He said that the people who are in faith groups, like I think most of us fit this category, who are more likely to be low RWA, are in a position to talk to some of the more fundamentalists to make them realize that, hey, Christianity isn't super authoritarianism, that it has a great level that is more moderate, more thinking, and is non-authoritarianism. And then the last slide I want to put up is this one right here, or two more. Higher education. He said that 4 years of college usually knocks the RWA score down 15 or 20%. And finally, speak up and vote. He said it's important that the low authoritarians, like hopefully most of us score low or at worst moderate, need to speak up and vote and not get overrun by the high authoritarian steamroller. Contribute your time and money to doing the right things, and try to work in your community, in religion and politics and social activities, and represent the quote non-authoritarian perspective better. So I've talked a lot, so let's open up the let me take off the screen here. And then he sort of said the power of one, courageous people standing up in situations. Good exemplar, Taylor Swift took a stand against some extreme authoritarian politicians. She's from Central Tennessee, around Nashville, and she stood up and took a stand against some of the authoritarian politicians in Tennessee. And then, of course, Dr. King. The time is always right to do what's right. Okay, let me get it off of share screen. Stop share. There we go. Okay, so I probably said something to offend everybody today. So let's go at it. And what do you think? What can we do to try to pull people back from high authoritarianism?
Ron?
Yes.
Yes. With the death of Rush Limbaugh, where would you categorize Rush Limbaugh?
High authoritarian. Yeah.
Things are black and white.
Yeah. Very, very authoritarian. Very high authoritarian.
Say, Ron, I was just throw out the question about the United Methodist Church schism right now. We talk about religion, and the progressives or maybe have a tendency or to be more low RWA, and the traditionalists and so on. The other factions are maybe a little higher RWA.
Yeah.
There's been a clear inability to well, I didn't say to talk, but a clear inability to come to any sort of understanding or agreement or harmony. A real life situation.
Yeah.
Ron, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Speak a little louder. I think that's.
Can you hear me, Ron? Ron? Am I off? Ron?
Can't hear you, Gene.
Can't hear well.
So I have a question. Where would you put Joe Biden on your continuum?
We'd have to give him the test, but I certainly wouldn't say he's a high authoritarian. He's probably fairly low in authoritarianism.
He has a more open-minded perspective on the Bible than the most rigid Catholic bishops and Catholic dogma have.
Yeah, some of the bishops would not give him communion in the Catholic Church, by the way. I think he went to a church in South Carolina.
Right.
They told him, no, we won't give you communion. So he's definitely on the more liberal end of the Catholic theology.
Ron, I had a question about the slide that said there is a desire to be normal, because high authoritarians that I know view normal as their view.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. They think because they associate with a group that's very like-minded, they think that that's the norm when it's not. It may be the norm in their group, but it's not the norm in society.
I'd like to go back to the gentleman who made the observation, I think a correct observation, between progressives and fundamentalists in Methodism. The key there is how people see and approach the Bible. The high authoritarians would say the Bible is the word of God, period. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Others of us would say God's words are in the Bible, and there are also some other things in the Bible that are not consistent with the teachings of Jesus. So if you have a very black and white approach to the Bible says same gender sexual relationships are wrong or an abomination. By the way, that word is used 70 times in the Old Testament to include handling a football, skin of a dead pig, or wearing clothes of two different fabrics. But if you have a black and white view of the Bible, that's where you're going to wind up as an RWA.
Okay.
Harvey, could I ask you for your input on that? What have you found is an effective, if there is, way to talk to people that are very conservative on that issue and try to share with them the progressive mindset? What have you found over the years is helpful?
I think there are persons who are more open and progressive who would say part of how they got that way was to know people of a different group. And Ron, by the way, Ron, what an excellent, thorough presentation again. Thank you so much. But what changed my prejudice against Hispanic people growing up, that was the major prejudice in my family of origin, is knowing Hispanic people. So realizing, being acquainted with, associating with people who are different from me, who are oriented towards same gender orientation, has changed people's minds. In Colorado Springs, when Amendment 2 was on the ballot in the 1990s in Colorado, one woman held a press conference with a bag over her head. She was an employee of a software company there, a very large company, Digital Equipment at that time, took the bag off and said, "You're talking about me. I'm gay."
But can I pick up on that? Can you hear me, Harvey? Yes. I attended something a couple of years ago at Denver Seminary. Denver Seminary hosted, the topic was on the LGBTQ, finding common ground. Invited was Iliff Seminary, Theology, Denver Seminary was there, members of a variety of faith communities, and the panel, Reformed Jews were on the panel, people of rabbis, and some conservative theologians, and there was a discussion on finding common ground. We were talking about bridging opportunities for those experiences. We had reflection, people had experiences.
Hey, you're a bit garbled.
Yes. Did you get enough of what I had to say?
Gene,
Yes.
Gene, we're sorry, but you're too garbled for us to understand.
Okay.
You might need a new microphone.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Harvey, go ahead.
Well, I think I've heard enough of what Gene was saying. If you look at the Denver Seminary Statement of Faith, it uses words that don't show up in the Bible and certainly are not words used in mainstream Protestantism. They say, we believe as a group that the Bible is inerrant and infallible. Well, that's one very black and white approach. The United Methodist Book of Discipline, our theological statement says the Bible contains the Word of God. It doesn't say the Bible is the Word of God. Those are different.
I think one way to bring people of opposing opinions or beliefs is working together on some common project. A lot of racist people go into the military, and where there's no racism or planned no racism, they come out with a lot of different views working together. And if I've had the experience of working on elections, being an election judge, and you're working with people with completely opposite political views of yourself, and one thing, they have Republicans and Democrats at every facet of the election process. So I think the elections in Colorado, at least, are very fair, and working together, I say, is a big builder of understanding. You come away from those experiences with friends with opposite basic beliefs.
Harvey, had a question for you that I think it's interesting what you say about the Bible and the right and the left. I've had some people on the 7th day, what is it, Karen? 7-day letter.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with them instead of just saying, I'm not interested. And I found, if you found this to be true, it's believe the Bible, like it says, inerrant, but they don't believe everything that's in there. Like we talked about certain things, like you steal, you cut your right arm, or you cut your arm off. He said, well, of course you're not going to cut your arm off. I mean, so they make exceptions for certain things they read as not literal.
But everything else is literal.
But so they decide, well, of course, this one, I'm not taking this literally.
Like an eye for an eye.
But it's, eye for an eye, or, where it's very, so I think it's interesting, I guess. I don't know if it's a question to you, but what your thoughts are on that, because, trying to get people to change and not see things. So, it's the Word of God, can we, do you find that to be true? With my conversation with 7-day letters,
the literalists who come to the Bible that way might say what you said about cutting off your arm or your hand, but they would also say women should have no leadership roles in church because it's in the Bible. 1st or 2nd Timothy says women are to be quiet in church and have no authority over men. So that's been the proof text that some of the most right-wing denominations have taken. It's more complex than that if you read all of Paul.
So many people take Paul's words as being Jesus' words. I think they're different.
Paul's much more liberated than we give him credit for, but that's a whole different discussion.
We've just got a couple minutes left, but I thought this was good topic too, the topic of preventing or rescuing from authoritarianism, because we know that there's also been people who have been taken out of cults, and people try to return their critical thinking skills after being in a cult, deprogram them. And it's also, we know that there was deprogramming for LGBTQ people for many years that's been debunked now as not effective. But it does bring in that whole aspect of that. And how do we apply that to authoritarianism when people have gone too far in that? So we barely scratched the surface, but Ron's done such a good job today. Thank you for helping us understand some of it, Ron.
Yeah, I want to put in a plug. March 7th, we're going to be doing a lesson on empathy, and we'll talk about some of the things we can do to build our empathy. and many things we do to build our empathy combat authoritarianism. A good example, Schindler from the famous movie Schindler's List, who saved at least 1,000 Jewish lives from the Holocaust. He started out as a Nazi, very intolerant, but by getting to know his bookkeeper at the factory, who was a Jewish man, and then some of his key people on the floor of his factory who were Jewish, he started to realize that they were people like him with fears, doubts, hopes, dreams. And he realized they weren't subhuman. They were very, very much like him and very warm, loving people. And it changed him completely.
That's an example of people working together.
And here's a question for the last 10 years in American culture and history. Why have we moved to such majority acceptance of same gender relationships when 10 years ago that was a really different statistic? The majority of Americans are willing and happy to affirm same gender marriage, same gender relationships. It's a radical change in 10 years. Why is that?
You know, about 20 years ago, a good majority in the gay community decided they needed to be out telling their stories. And so they started a big movement to be visible. And the more visible they were, the more people came to see them as people.
Good point. Well, next week we have as our guest Lana Bienberry, our executive director of St. Andrew, the business director. She's an attorney, but now working full-time for our church, and she's going to talk about all the things that she does and the committees of the church, the COVID committee, and how they are looking at bringing us back to in-person services at the church, as well as marketing that we're doing and the online services, everything that's going to be tried to improve for the online marketing. So lots of good angles to talk with her about, and we'll get to know her. Well, we've got to go. Thank you, Ron, again for another good class. Everybody, good discussion.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Ron.
we will
Thank you,
see you
Ron.
next week.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good week, everybody.
You too.